Welcome back. How many of you, after engaging in that exercise, learned something about the person sitting next to you that you would never have known or would never have guessed otherwise? And very often I get lots of hands up after I ask that question, and that's because what happens is in sharing the different cultures that you belong to, you begin to learn about other people, and as you begin to learn about other people and identify commonalities that you have with one another, that begins to form the basis or the foundation of a relationship. I often say that if you're in the audience and you're a mom, a baby boomer, and a swimmer, and you find somebody else with those three characteristics, you know that Land's End makes the most forgiving bathing suits for women over the age of 50. It's just common knowledge. And when we begin to connect on those kinds of things, you begin to form a relationship, and it's in forming a relationship that you begin to find out about the other person's culture, and you begin to become educated and become more comfortable navigating and learning more about other people's cultures. I encourage you to use this exercise at the beginning of a school year or as an icebreaker because it really is a fun way to have people who are going to be working together get to know one another. So we've examined culture, we've defined it, you've learned about the cultures that I belong to, you've examined the cultures that you belong to. Now let's go on and define competence. The definition of competence that I gravitated towards, again, is a definition that is by Terry Cross, having the capacity to perform effectively. And I think that's very simple and very commonsensical, and everybody understands that definition of competence. And now when you put them both together, cultural competence, here's the definition that I like: the ability to interact effectively with people of different cultures. So that's what we're talking about today. And I found this definition on Wikipedia. And when I'm talking to particularly school faculties, I say, I know we don't allow students to use Wikipedia as a resource. And when I give this as a PowerPoint presentation, I have Wikipedia in little teeny tiny writing. And I say, if you don't tell the students I used it, I won't tell them either. So, and I like the term cultural competence. I prefer that term to cultural sensitivity because sensitivity kind of sounds like you're in the dentist's office and somebody's coming at you with the drill. I also prefer the term cultural competence to cultural tolerance because, you know, when you're being culturally tolerant, it sounds like, oh, you'll deal with it and you'll manage it. You don't really want to, but if you have to. And I just find cultural competence is a term that's very emotionless. There aren't a lot of values or attributes or emotions tied to it. And it's a very neutral term that everybody understands. I first ran across the term cultural competence when it was used in the military. I was reading the Washington Post one morning, and there was an article about our soldiers who were deployed in Iraq taking lessons in cultural competence so that they would learn how to do things like handle the Quran, the book, when they distributed it to prisoners of war. Or they would be taught lessons in cultural competence so when at checkpoints, at military checkpoints, soldiers had to check women wearing full burqas so that they would be able to do that in a way that to minimize the offensiveness of doing that. The term cultural competence also appears in healthcare. And when you think about it, cultural competence is very important when you talk about the doctor-patient relationship, because sometimes you can be talking about issues of life or death. I have a dear friend whose father is a physician. And he tells the story of having a patient come into his office and saying, Ms. Smith, I'd like to tell you that your cancer is benign. And she says, oh, Dr. Jones, I promised a relative that I would call as soon as you gave me the diagnosis. May I use your phone? And please stay here while I call. And he said, absolutely. She picked up the phone. She called the relative. She said, I'm here in Dr. Smith's office. And he just told me that I don't have one kind of cancer. I have 9 kinds of cancers. Oh. Now, if the doctor had not been in that room, he would never have known that his patient didn't understand the term benign and thought that it meant you have 9 different forms of cancer. So understanding language, understanding terminology, understanding the language and terminology of different cultures is very important in the physician-patient relationship. And lastly, the term cultural competence is starting to creep in more and more in terms of the field of education. And issues of culture and race can pop up expectedly in educational situations. If you're a teacher and you're doing a unit on slavery, chances are there's going to be some conversation in your classroom about race or culture. But it can also come up completely unexpectedly. I had a science teacher tell me that totally out of the blue. She was not expecting it. But conversations about race occurred in her chemistry classroom after they had a conversation about melanin, the element in the body that creates pigment on your skin. And I often have teachers come up to me after the presentation and talk about encountering the N-word unexpectedly, hearing it in the hallway, hearing it on the football field. And what I say is you have to know what that word means to you and understand that word before you can begin to intercede as an adult. We're going to take another break. And at this juncture, what I'd like you to do is share with an elbow partner instances of when race and culture have arisen in your place of work, either with students or with the adult colleagues that you work with, either expectedly or unexpectedly. So talk about that among yourselves.
Trends in immigration and birth rates indicate that soon there will be no majority racial or ethnic group in the U.S. No one group that makes up more than 50% of the total population. The Center for Public Education.